Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a place where water mirrors the sky and gardens seem to float, where the first breath of dawn feels cool on your face and the world hasn't quite decided to wake up yet. You're standing at the edge of ancient canals in Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, as the horizon blushes pale pink and the lake lies so still it looks like polished stone. You can smell wet earth and crushed leaves, hear the faint lap of water against reeds, and somewhere far off, a bird clears its throat like it's about to start the day's announcements. This is one of those slow, immersive moments where your brain wants to wander, but don't worry, you probably won't survive this with your productivity intact tomorrow. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, drop a comment with your location and local time. It's always wild to imagine people drifting off to sleep all over the planet together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin walking along a narrow earthen path, water on both sides, as if the land itself is politely making room for you. The Chinampas stretch ahead, long rectangular plots edged with reeds and willow trees, their roots gripping the lakebed below like patient fingers. Mainstream historians agree that this system of agriculture was one of the most productive in the pre-industrial world, capable of feeding hundreds of thousands in a dense urban center. And as you stroll, it's easy to believe that. Everything looks alive, overfed even, leaves glossy with moisture, soil dark and rich like it's been composting its thoughts for centuries. The sky lightens by degrees you can barely track, the way sleep fades when you're not ready to wake. Canoes sit motionless in the canals, their silhouettes thin and calm. You imagine a farmer will soon appear, pole dipping silently into the water, but for now it's just you and the gardens. There's a quiet intimacy here, the kind that makes you instinctively lower your voice, even though no one asked you to. Somewhere nearby, a frog plops into the water, immediately regretting the noise. That's joke one for the night. Even the frogs are trying not to wake anyone. As you move, you notice how deliberate everything feels. These aren't random patches of land. They're carefully engineered islands built by layering mud dredged from the lake with vegetation and organic waste. A quirky tidbit scholars love to mention is that Aztec farmers sometimes used human waste as fertilizer, transported in canoes from the city, ancient recycling at its most committed. Remember that the next time someone tells you sustainability is a modern invention. Historians still argue whether the incredible fertility of Chinampas came more from this constant nutrient input or from the microclimate created by surrounding water, which protected crops from frost and extreme heat. The light strengthens, and the lake begins to show color, greens from floating plants, faint blues where the sky finally admits it's morning. You can hear the city now, just barely, a distant cough, the muted knock of wood on wood. Tenochtitlan at dawn is holding its breath, and you're walking through its pantry. Maize stalks stand tall, beans curl politely around supports, squash leaves sprawl with quiet confidence. The famous Three Sisters crops are here, a mainstream fact taught in textbooks, working together in agricultural harmony long before the term existed. Corn provides structure, beans fix nitrogen, squash shades the soil. Teamwork makes the dream work, even in the 15th century. That's joke two, sorry, I'll behave. You pause at the edge of a canal and look down into the water. It's clear enough to see aquatic plants swaying gently, tiny fish flickering like stray thoughts. Some accounts suggest that Chinampa canals also helped manage waste and provided protein through fish and insects, making the whole system even more efficient. Other scholars push back, saying the extent of this aquatic farming has been overstated. Historians still argue whether Chinampas were a perfectly balanced closed system or just very, very good farmland with great PR. A soft breeze moves through the willows lining the plots, their branches trained to mark boundaries and stabilize soil. Birds begin their morning routines. One squawks too loudly, clearly not an ASMR fan. Joke 3, and I promise that's the quota for this stretch. The sun finally peaks above the horizon, sending a thin ribbon of gold across the water, and suddenly the gardens don't look like they're floating anymore. They look anchored, intentional, deeply rooted in a way that feels comforting. As you keep walking, your steps fall into rhythm with the place. There's no rush here, no need to check the time. Dawn unfolds at its own pace, and the Chinampas have seen thousands of mornings just like this. You're just passing through, borrowing a bit of their calm, letting the quiet soak in as the day gently begins around you.
You step fully onto the Chinampa now, and the ground beneath your feet feels different from ordinary soil, springy, slightly forgiving, as if it remembers being water not that long ago. Each step presses gently, then releases, and you instinctively slow down, not wanting to disturb the balance. The canal on either side reflects the brightening sky, and for a moment you feel like you're walking on a thin idea rather than land. This is the strange magic of Chinampas, gardens that hover between solid and liquid, confidence and collapse, somehow pulling it all off without drama. You look closer at the edges of the plot. Reeds rise in tight rows, their bases tangled and dark, stitched together with roots that bite deep into the lake bed. Between them, the water barely moves, protected from waves and wind. Mainstream history agrees that this was no accident. Aztec engineers intentionally designed Chinampas to reduce erosion and keep nutrients from drifting away. It's farming as architecture, or architecture pretending to be farming. Either way, it works, and it's been working for centuries. As you walk, your senses tune in. The smell here is rich but clean. Wet leaves, fresh stems, a hint of sweetness from flowers you don't immediately recognize. You brush your fingers lightly against a maize leaf, and droplets roll off like the plant just woke up and hasn't had coffee yet. That's joke 1, by the way. Plants absolutely need coffee. Or, in this case, lake muck. A quirky detail often mentioned is that farmers regularly dredged the canals and piled the nutrient-heavy mud directly onto the fields, constantly rebuilding the soil from below. Imagine if your house improved itself every time you cleaned the gutters. The path narrows, forcing you into a careful, almost meditative stride. You notice wooden stakes driven at intervals, some new, some ancient and smooth from generations of hands. These mark boundaries, support vines, and quietly enforce order. Historians still argue whether Chinampas were privately owned family plots or more communally managed under state oversight, and as you walk, it's easy to see both sides. The gardens feel personal, lovingly maintained, but also part of a massive, coordinated system that fed an empire. It's cozy and intimidating at the same time, like a small cafe that secretly caters entire cities. The sun climbs higher, and the floating illusion becomes more convincing. Reflections blur the line between earth and water until you're not quite sure where one ends and the other begins. Canoes glide past now, almost silently, farmers standing steady as poles dip and rise. They don't look at you, not because you're invisible, but because this is just morning. You're the weird one, wandering around without a job to do. Joke 2. If there were ancient productivity apps, you'd definitely be getting a reminder notification right now. You notice the crops arranged with intention, tall plants blocking wind for shorter ones, broad leaves shading delicate seedlings. This intercropping isn't random. It's a refined agricultural practice passed down through generations. Mainstream scholars point out that Chinampas could yield multiple harvests a year, far outperforming European fields of the same period. That fact tends to make modern gardeners either very inspired or very annoyed. Somewhere, a person with a struggling backyard tomato plant just felt a disturbance in the force. At the water's edge, you pause again, crouching to watch ripples spread from a passing canoe. Tiny insects skate across the surface, unconcerned with history, empire, or your sudden urge to nap. There's a fringe theory, still debated, that Chinampa canals functioned as temperature regulators, absorbing heat during the day and releasing it at night, protecting crops from frost. Some researchers swear by this microclimate effect. Others argue it's been exaggerated. Historians still argue whether this thermal buffering was a primary advantage or just a happy side effect of farming on water. Either way, the plants seem unbothered, thriving in their watery embrace. A heron lifts off nearby, wings slow and deliberate, as if it too respects the unspoken quiet rules of dawn. The sound of its wings is soft, more suggestion than noise. You straighten and continue walking, feeling your breathing naturally sync with your steps. There's something about narrow paths and water on both sides that pulls you inward, trimming away unnecessary thoughts. You remember the rich soil from earlier, the way it looked almost black with life, and you realize this entire landscape is a conversation between humans and nature that somehow never turned into an argument. You pass a small shrine tucked near the edge of a plot, simple, worn, a few flowers placed carefully. Agriculture here isn't just labor, it's spiritual routine. Crops are food, yes, but also offerings, calendar markers, quiet negotiations with gods who control rain and sun. Mainstream history notes that farming schedules were closely tied to religious festivals, but there's debate over how much flexibility farmers actually had. Historians still argue whether ritual dictated agriculture or agriculture dictated ritual, and honestly, it feels like both are just politely pretending the other is in charge. The path widens slightly, and you let out a slow breath you didn't realize you were holding. Joke 3. Congratulations, you've unlocked the ancient achievement, didn't fall into canal at dawn. The gardens stretch on, repeating patterns that somehow never feel boring. Each Chinampa is similar, but none are the same, like thoughts drifting by when you're half asleep. As you keep moving forward, the city behind you grows louder, the gardens ahead glow brighter, and you find yourself suspended in that perfect in-between moment. Not fully awake, not ready to stop walking, just letting the floating fields carry you onward. You drift alongside the canal now, close enough that the water feels like a companion rather than a boundary. The surface breaks softly as a canoe passes, the paddle entering with a muted plunk and leaving behind ripples that spread and dissolve before they reach you. This is the soundscape of morning here. Not silence exactly, but restraint. Everything behaves as if loudness might offend the lake. You slow your pace without meaning to, matching the glide of the boats, letting the rhythm of dip and pull set the tempo for your thoughts. The canals are narrow but purposeful, laid out like veins between the Chinampas, carrying more than just water. Mainstream historians agree these waterways were the primary transportation network of Tenochtitlan, far more efficient than roads for moving food, people, and supplies. Canoes could reach directly from field to market without ever touching dry land. As you watch one pass, stacked neatly with baskets of greens and flowers, it feels obvious. Why drag a cart when the city floats? Somewhere in another timeline, traffic engineers are still kicking themselves for not thinking of this. The air smells cooler here, tinged with algae and fresh water. You notice how the canal edges are reinforced with roots and woven plant matter, forming soft walls that hold firm without looking aggressive about it. A quirky tidbit that often surprises people is that some canals were regularly stocked with fish and axolotls, turning transportation lanes into mobile pantries. Yes, those smiling little amphibians were once dinner, not just cute internet celebrities. Joke 1, fame really does change you. You lean slightly over the water, careful not to lose balance, and watch reflections stretch and snap as another canoe glides through. The person steering stands calmly, knees slightly bent, pole pressing against the canal bottom with practiced ease. No rush, no wasted motion. This is muscle memory shaped by childhood, by repetition so deep it doesn't need conscious thought. Historians still argue whether such specialized skills were taught formally within families or learned informally through observation and play. But watching the effortless movement, it's hard to imagine anyone needing a lesson plan. Sound carries strangely over water. A cough from far away sounds closer than it should, while nearby noises seem to dissolve. You hear the faint thud of a basket being set down, a murmur of voices from another canal intersecting this one. The city is waking up in layers, like a dimmer switch slowly being turned. Joke 2, somewhere an Aztec rooster is absolutely failing at its job. As you walk, you notice small landings, simple wooden platforms extending from Chinampas into the canal. These are loading zones, pauses built into the landscape. Produce moves from soil to boat in a single step, minimizing effort, maximizing efficiency. Mainstream accounts emphasize how this system allowed markets like Tlatelolco to be supplied daily with astonishing quantities of fresh food. Tens of thousands of people shopping every day, supported by these quiet waterways you're strolling beside. It's almost rude how calm it feels given the scale of what's happening. The water itself isn't passive. Floating plants cluster near the edges, filtering impurities, offering shade. Some scholars suggest canal maintenance included deliberate management of these plants to keep water clean and navigable. Others argued they were simply tolerated, not curated. Historians still argue whether water quality was actively engineered or just a fortunate byproduct of constant flow and plant life. You watch a leaf spin slowly in place, caught in an eddy, and decide the water doesn't care about the debate either way. A sudden splash breaks your focus, just a fish, startled by your shadow. You smile despite yourself, then remember you're supposed to be relaxing and not reacting to things. Joke 3, even the fish are jumpy before breakfast. The canal returns to stillness almost immediately, as if nothing happened. That quick reset is comforting, a reminder that disturbances here are temporary, absorbed and smoothed out by design. You continue walking, and the path curves gently, revealing a longer stretch of canal ahead. Canoes move in both directions now, some empty, some heavy with harvest. There's an unspoken etiquette. Passing is slow, polite, with minimal wake. This isn't just infrastructure, it's culture expressed through movement. Mainstream historians note that water travel shaped social interactions, trade relationships, even language, embedding aquatic metaphors into daily life. Living here means thinking like water, flexible, patient, persistent. You catch sight of a child seated at the front of a canoe, feet dangling dangerously close to the surface. An adult steers from behind, unconcerned. Trust is built early here, alongside balance. There's debate among scholars about how early children participated in agricultural labor versus informal learning, but moments like this suggest the line was blurry. Historians still argue whether childhood in Tenochtitlan was structured around strict roles or fluid contribution, and honestly, it looks like both happening at once. The sun is higher now, scattering light across the canal in shifting fragments. The water reflects the sky reflects the water, and your sense of up and down softens. Walking beside the canal feels like pacing a slow, breathing mirror. Your thoughts begin to thin out, no longer clustering or racing, just drifting along with the ripples. You realize that these canals don't just connect places, they connect states of mind. Movement here is smooth, repetitive, almost hypnotic. Each paddle stroke echoes the last. Each ripple fades into the next. You keep walking, letting the sound of water and wood guide you forward, deeper into the morning, deeper into that calm space where nothing needs to happen quickly.
You step off the canal's edge and onto another Chinampa, and the soil here looks even darker, almost glossy, like it's been freshly polished by centuries of care. When you press your foot down, it holds firm, confident, as if to reassure you that yes, this floating garden knows exactly what it's doing. You pause, letting your toes sink just enough to feel the coolness beneath the surface, and you realize this ground isn't just dirt, it's a carefully layered memory of reeds, lake mud, decaying plants, and time. This is where the real magic happens. Mainstream history textbooks explain that Chinampa soil was built up gradually by dredging nutrient-rich sediment from the canals and piling it onto the fields, over and over again. It's maintenance as ritual, repetition as sustainability. You imagine generations of farmers scooping dark muck from the water, spreading it evenly, knowing that future harvests depend on this quiet, slightly smelly effort. Joke 1. Turns out the secret ingredient really was elbow grease and mud. Lots of mud. You kneel and run your fingers through the earth. It's crumbly but moist, alive with tiny roots and unseen organisms doing their microscopic jobs. This soil can support maize stalks taller than you, beans that climbed eagerly upward, and squash vines that sprawl like they've paid rent for the space. The famous trio again, corn, beans, squash, working together not just above ground but below it, each contributing to the soil's health. Mainstream scholars often point to this interdependence as a key reason Chinampas remained productive year after year without exhausting the land. There's a quirky detail that doesn't always make it into polite summaries. Human waste from the city was collected and composted, then transported by canoe to fertilize these fields. Night soil, as it's delicately called, closed the nutrient loop between city and garden. It's one of those facts that makes modern audiences squirm and ancient farmers nod knowingly. Sustainable? Absolutely. Glamorous? Not even a little. Joke 2. Suddenly, taking out the trash feels historically significant. You stand and look across the plot, noticing how crops are arranged not in straight, obsessive rows, but in patterns that feel organic and intentional at the same time. Taller plants shield shorter ones from wind. Broad leaves shade the soil, keeping moisture from evaporating too quickly. Historians still argue whether these layouts were standardized across the empire or adapted plot by plot based on family knowledge and micro conditions. Watching the way leaves overlap and stems lean into one another, it feels less like strict planning and more like conversation. Plants negotiating space, light, and water with gentle persistence. The air here smells faintly sweet, mixed with that deep, earthy scent that only well-fed soil has. You notice flowers planted among the food crops, marigolds perhaps, not just for beauty, but for pests, pollinators, and ritual use. Mainstream history confirms that Chinampas grew not only staples, but flowers in huge quantities, supplying markets and ceremonies alike. Tenochtitlan was famous for its blossoms, and standing here, it's easy to see why. Even the practical spaces feel ornamental, as if beauty is just another crop that happens to thrive. You hear a soft scraping sound and realize a farmer is nearby, using a simple wooden tool to shape the soil around young plants. The motion is slow, careful, almost meditative. There's no rushing the ground. It doesn't respond well to being bullied. A fringe theory suggests that this constant low-impact cultivation helped maintain soil structure and microbial life better than heavy tools ever could. Some scholars support this idea enthusiastically, while others caution against romanticizing pre-modern methods. Historians still argue whether Chinampa productivity came primarily from technique, environment, or social organization, and the honest answer is probably all of the above, plus patience. You watch water seep gently from the canal into the field, guided by subtle slopes and channels. Irrigation here is passive, relying on gravity and proximity rather than force. Mainstream accounts note that this kept roots consistently moist without waterlogging them, a delicate balance modern farmers still struggle to achieve. The lake does most of the work, humans just set the stage. Joke 3, it's like outsourcing your responsibilities to a very reliable body of water. The sun climbs higher, warming your shoulders, and you feel the soil beneath you respond, releasing a faint earthy heat. This place isn't static, it breathes with the day. You think about how much knowledge is embedded here, not written down, but practiced, adjusted, passed on. Each successful harvest is a quiet confirmation that someone remembered how things are supposed to work. There's debate among historians about how resilient this system really was. Some argue Chinampas could sustain endless growth. Others point to signs of strain as the population expanded. Historians still argue whether environmental limits were being approached before Spanish arrival or whether the system was cut short before its breaking point. Standing in the middle of this lush field, it's hard to imagine scarcity. Everything looks generous, almost indulgent. You straighten up and take one last look at the soil, dark and rich, doing its slow, invisible labor. It's easy to overlook dirt, to think of it as background, but here it's the star of the show. This ground holds water, nutrients, history, and future meals all at once. As you step back toward the path, you carry that awareness with you, feeling oddly grounded for someone walking on what is essentially a floating garden.
You slow to a stop as the air shifts around you, cooler again, damp with a mist that seems to rise straight out of the water. The Chinampas ahead soften at the edges, their sharp lines blurred by fog that curls low and patient, like it has nowhere else to be. Birdsong layers itself gently over the quiet. First a single call, then another answering from somewhere deeper in the gardens. It's not loud or dramatic. It's tentative, as if the birds are checking whether morning is officially allowed to begin. You breathe in, and the air feels clean, faintly sweet, carrying the scent of flowers mixed with lake water. This is the moment that gardens feel most alive, balanced perfectly between night and day. Mainstream historians often describe dawn as the primary working hour for Chinampa farmers, a time chosen not just for cooler temperatures, but for ritual significance. Morning marked renewal, alignment with the sun, a daily reset that mattered just as much spiritually as it did practically. A heron stands motionless at the edge of a canal, neck curved in that impossible way, watching the water with laser focus. When it moves, it's sudden and precise. One clean strike, then stillness again. You feel like you've accidentally walked into a nature documentary that forgot to add narration. Joke 1. Somewhere, a narrator with a very serious voice is disappointed you can't hear him. The mist thins as the sun rises higher, sending pale gold threads through the fog. Light catches on spiderwebs stretched between reeds, turning them briefly into silver jewelry before they vanish again. Crops glow softly, dew clinging to leaves and reflecting the sky in fragments. Mainstream accounts note that this moisture was crucial, reducing the need for additional irrigation during early hours. The lake gives generously, if quietly. There's a quirky belief recorded in some sources that morning dew carried spiritual potency, a blessing from the gods that strengthened plants and people alike. While hard evidence is thin, the idea persisted long enough to suggest it mattered. Historians still argue whether such beliefs directly influenced farming practices or simply coexisted alongside practical knowledge. But standing here, watching dew drip slowly back into the soil, it's easy to understand why people felt something sacred in this moment. Birdsong grows more confident now, calls overlapping, rhythms emerging. You recognize none of the species, but the effect is universal, a gentle signal that the day is underway. Canoes move again in the distance, silhouettes cutting through low fog, appearing and disappearing like thoughts you almost remember. Joke 2, it's basically ancient surround sound, minus the subscription fee. The sun finally clears the horizon fully, and the mist retreats in stages, reluctant to leave. Colors sharpen, greens deepen. The gardens no longer feel like they're floating, they feel anchored, awake. You realize how carefully timed everything here is. Work begins when light is right, when plants are cool, when water is calm. Mainstream historians emphasize that this timing maximized efficiency and minimized stress on both people and crops. There's debate, though, about how rigid these schedules were. Some scholars argue farmers followed strict routines tied to calendars and ritual days. Others suggest flexibility ruled, guided more by weather and intuition. Historians still argue whether Chinampa life was tightly regulated or loosely adaptive, and the truth likely lived somewhere in the quiet space between. You stand there a moment longer, letting the last of the fog lift, listening as birds settle into background noise rather than main event. The gardens stretch on, fully revealed now, generous and calm, ready for another day of feeding a city. You feel a subtle satisfaction, like you arrived just in time to see something private before it became ordinary again. The pace softens now, your steps slow, not because you're tired, but because there's no reason to hurry anymore. The light is steady, warm but gentle, and the water resumes its barely there movement. You notice your breathing deepen, stretch out, become unimportant. The Chinampas no longer ask for your attention, they simply exist alongside you. Sounds blur together, the distant paddle, the last insistent bird call, the soft brush of leaves in a light breeze. Your thoughts do the same, losing their sharp edges, drifting without needing direction. The gardens have shown you enough. They don't demand understanding, only presence. You imagine this moment repeating across centuries, countless mornings unfolding the same way, each one quiet, each one complete. Farmers come and go, empires rise and fall, but dawn keeps returning to the water, to the soil, to the mist. You let your shoulders drop. The path beneath you feels steady.
the world feels manageable again. And as the last traces of fog disappear and the gardens settle fully into day, you allow yourself to fade gently out of the scene, carrying the calm with you, letting it stretch and soften until there's nothing left to do but rest.
You notice the rhythm before you notice the people. A soft scrape of wood against soil, the faint splash of water being lifted and poured, the gentle thud of a basket set down with care. As you move deeper into the Chinampas, farmers come into view. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but as if they've always been there, and you're only just tuning your attention correctly. They work early, when the light is kind and the air still holds a trace of night. Bodies moving in patterns learned so well they barely need thought. You watch one farmer straighten slowly, pressing a hand into the small of his back, then reach for a simple wooden tool shaped smooth by years of use. Mainstream historians agree that Chinampa tools were intentionally uncomplicated. Digging sticks, wooden hoes, stone blades, designed for precision rather than brute force. Heavy plows would have torn the delicate structure of the floating fields apart. Here, care beats power every time. Joke 1. Turns out gentle parenting also applies to agriculture. The farmer steps carefully along the narrow plot, placing his feet exactly where the soil is strongest. He knows this ground the way you know your own room in the dark. Each movement is economical, efficient, and strangely calming to watch. There's no wasted energy, no dramatic gestures, just steady progress. You realize these daily routines aren't just work, they're a form of quiet conversation with the land, a check-in that says, "Still good? Still growing?" Nearby, another person kneels to thin seedlings, fingers moving delicately through damp soil. The plants removed aren't tossed aside carelessly, they're set into a small pile, likely to be composted or replanted elsewhere. Mainstream accounts highlight how little waste this system produced. Nearly everything had a second purpose. Even mistakes were recyclable. Joke 2. Imagine a world where even your bad decisions turned into fertilizer. You notice how tools are shared, passed back and forth without ceremony. No one guards them possessively. Some historians suggest that while Chinampas were often family managed, tools and labor moved fluidly between households, especially during busy seasons. Others argue ownership was stricter, with clear boundaries. Historians still argue whether daily agricultural life leaned more toward communal cooperation or individual responsibility, but watching hands exchange tools with quiet trust, it feels like cooperation won most mornings. The work isn't silent. Soft murmurs pass between neighbors, brief comments about water levels, leaf color, the look of the sky. Nothing urgent, just observations, like people comparing notes on something they all understand deeply. Ritual blends seamlessly into routine here. A pause before planting, a quiet word spoken to the soil. Mainstream history records that farming tasks were often accompanied by small offerings or prayers, acknowledging gods associated with rain, fertility, and maize. These weren't grand ceremonies, just daily habits woven into motion. There's a fringe idea some researchers explore, that these repetitive movements and rituals served as a form of embodied knowledge, reinforcing timing and technique through the body rather than written instruction. Others are skeptical, arguing this interpretation reads too much intention into practicality. Historians still argue whether ritual actions meaningfully shaped farming success or simply mirrored it. But standing here, watching the same motions repeated with calm precision, it's hard not to feel there's more happening that meets the eye. A child appears at the edge of a plot, holding a small basket almost too big for their arms. An adult gestures gently, guiding where to set it down. No scolding, no rush. Learning happens through doing, through being present. Mainstream sources note that children were introduced early to agricultural tasks, but not always burdened with heavy labor. There's debate about how demanding childhood really was in Tenochtitlan. Historians still argue whether childhood's work was primarily educational or economically necessary, and the truth likely shifted with season and circumstance. The sun continues its slow climb, warming the air just enough that you notice sweat beginning to form on foreheads, backs, necks. Still, no one hurries. Water is lifted from canals and poured carefully at the base of plants, not sprayed wildly. This is irrigation as a tension, not force. Mainstream historians emphasize how Chinampa farmers used proximity to water to maintain consistent moisture, avoiding the stress cycles common in dryfield farming. You catch the faint scent of food, maize dough being prepared somewhere nearby, maybe for a mid-morning break. Work and life overlap here completely. There's no sharp division. Joke 3. The original work from home setup, minus the emails. A farmer pauses to stretch, looking out over the water for a moment, eyes unfocused, then returns to the task at hand. Breaks are short, but they exist, folded naturally into the flow of the day. There's also a quiet discipline at play. Certain tasks happen in a specific order, at specific times. Planting aligns with the calendar, with the sun's position, with signs in the sky. Mainstream history tells us Aztec calendars were complex, combining ritual and solar systems to guide agriculture. Yet scholars debate how strictly farmers followed official calendar dates versus local environmental cues. Historians still argue whether timing was dictated from above or negotiated on the ground, plant by plant. As you walk on, you feel yourself adopting the same pace, the same attentiveness. Your steps soften, your thoughts do too. Watching these routines unfold, you understand how repetition becomes comfort, how daily work can anchor a person in place and time. There's nothing flashy here, nothing designed to impress, but everything functions smoothly and quietly because people show up each morning and do what needs to be done. You leave the farmers behind, their motions continuing without you, and carry that steadiness forward.
The gardens hum with gentle activity now, fully awake, and you move through it all like a respectful guest, unhurried, observant, letting the calm of their routines settle into you.
You feel the pull of the city before you see it. Not noise exactly, more like a low awareness, a sense that all these quiet gardens are leaning towards something larger. As you walk, the canals widen slightly, intersections appearing like calm crossroads, and the movement of canoes becomes more purposeful. Loads are heavier now, baskets stacked with maize ears, bundles of greens tied neatly with fiber, crates of flowers whose colors peek out even at a distance. Everything flows in one direction, toward mouths you'll never see. This is where the Chinampas reveal their second identity. Not just gardens, but supply lines. Mainstream historians agree that markets such as Tlatelolco were fed daily by these floating fields, supporting tens of thousands of shoppers and an enormous urban population. Food didn't trickle in, it arrived in steady, reliable waves, timed to dawn harvests and early transport. As you watch canoe after canoe glide past, it hits you that this peaceful place is doing industrial-scale work without ever looking stressed about it. A canoe pauses at a landing near you, and a farmer steps out, lifting a basket with practiced ease. The basket is heavier than it looks, packed tight with produce harvested minutes ago. Another canoe slides in, takes its place, and moves on. No congestion, no shouting. Joke 1. If modern delivery apps worked like this, customer service complaints would drop to zero, and everyone would mysteriously be calmer. You notice how specialized some loads are. One canoe carries nothing but flowers, marigolds, bright and dense, likely destined for rituals, homes, or public spaces. Mainstream sources confirm that flower cultivation was a major Chinampa product, not a side hobby. Tenochtitlan was famous for its blooms, and flowers functioned as symbols of status, offerings to gods, and everyday beauty. It's strangely soothing to realize that even an empire needs decoration, not just calories. There's a quirky tidbit scholars love to bring up. Some vendors in the markets could identify exactly which Chinampa a product came from, based on size, freshness, or even taste. Think ancient produce snobs. Oh, this maize, definitely Eastern Canals. You can tell by the kernel. Joke 2. Congratulations, you've stumbled into the world's first farmer's market discourse. As you continue walking, the pace of movement increases, but the mood stays gentle. Canoes pass one another with inches to spare, poles dipping in synchronized calm. This efficiency didn't come from rigid enforcement alone, it came from shared expectation. Everyone knows where they're going and when they should be there. Mainstream historians often point out that Aztec markets operated under strict rules and oversight, with officials ensuring fairness and order. Yet how much of that order began out here, on the water, through habit rather than authority, is still debated. Historians still argue whether market efficiency was primarily driven by state regulation or by deeply ingrained social norms developed through daily practice. Watching these farmers move with such quiet confidence, it feels like the rules are already written into their bodies, long before any official ever steps in. You pause at a wider junction where multiple canals converge. The water here is busier, rippled by constant passage, but it never feels chaotic. Loads are redistributed, directions chosen, brief words exchanged. There's no sense of competition, just coordination. This is cooperation scaled up until it feeds a city. The smell changes subtly as you get closer to the urban edge. Less wet earth, more human presence. Smoke from cooking fires drifts faintly on the air, mixing with the scent of fresh produce. Your stomach reacts before your brain does. Joke 3, turns out ancient food delivery is still extremely effective. You imagine the market ahead, fast, crowded, loud, in contrast to these calm canals. Mainstream accounts describe Tlatelolco as one of the largest markets in the world at the time, with goods organized by type, price, and quality. Everything you're seeing now is headed there. Each canoe a small but vital thread in a massive daily tapestry. It's almost funny how the most hectic place in the city depends entirely on this quiet morning choreography. There's a scholarly debate about scale here. Some researchers argue Chinampas alone could support the entire population of Tenochtitlan. Others believe additional tribute and regional trade were essential. Historians still argue whether Chinampa agriculture was sufficient on its own or merely the backbone of a larger imperial system. Standing at this juncture, watching the steady flow of food outward, it's easy to believe the gardens could do almost anything. But belief and proof aren't the same thing. A farmer glances your way briefly, then back to the water. There's no suspicion, no curiosity. You're just another presence along the route, as unremarkable as a post or a reed. That anonymity feels oddly comforting. You're not needed here, and that's okay. The system doesn't pause for you. It doesn't need to. As the canoes move on, the junction clears, returning to gentle ripples and reflected sky. You realize how seamlessly abundance has been built into this landscape. Food isn't hoarded, dramatized, or made scarce on purpose. It moves daily, predictably, from soil to water to city. The gardens don't celebrate this fact, they simply repeat it. You turn slightly, following the path away from the busiest flow, letting the sense of scale settle into you. The Chinampas hum behind the scenes, invisible to most of the people they feed. And as you walk on, you feel that familiar calm return.
the comfort of knowing that somewhere, quietly and reliably, something essential is being taken care of.
You move away from the busiest canals, and almost immediately the world seems to exhale. The water smooths out again, the traffic thins, and the Chinampas return to their quiet, self-contained rhythm. From here, the gardens look deceptively simple. Flat plots, straight edges, calm water, but you can feel that there's more going on underneath. This calm is structural. It's held together by things you can't see, and the more you walk, the more you sense the hidden effort keeping everything steady. You stop near the edge of a plot and peer down into the canal. The water is darker here, shaded by plants, but you can make out submerged roots reaching downward like anchors. Mainstream historians agree that Chinampas were stabilized by planting trees, often willows, along their edges, their roots binding soil and gripping the lakebed below. These living supports prevented erosion and kept the floating fields from drifting apart. It's engineering disguised as landscaping, the kind that doesn't brag about itself. You imagine the original construction, wooden stakes driven deep into the lake floor, woven together with reeds, slowly filled in with mud and vegetation. Layer by layer, year after year, land is coaxed into existence. A quirky tidbit some researchers love to point out is that this process never really stopped. Chinampas weren't built once and left alone. They were constantly repaired, rebuilt, adjusted. Maintenance wasn't a chore, it was the system. Joke 1. Turns out the secret to longevity is never declaring anything finished. As you walk, you notice subtle variations in height. Some plots sit just a little higher than others, enough to keep roots from drowning during heavy rains. Water levels are managed not by gates or pumps, but by an understanding of slope and flow. Mainstream sources highlight how Chinampa canals were interconnected, allowing excess water to move away gradually rather than flood fields. This isn't brute force control, it's cooperation with gravity. There's debate among scholars about how centralized this engineering knowledge was. Some argue state planners oversaw large-scale layout and maintenance, while others believe local farmers handled most decisions based on experience. Historians still argue whether Chinampa infrastructure was top-down design or bottom-up adaptation, and as you watch how seamlessly everything fits together, it feels less like a hierarchy and more like a long-running conversation. You hear a faint creak beneath your feet, a reminder that what feels solid is still technically floating. The sound doesn't alarm you, it's more like a settling noise, the gardens adjusting themselves. Joke 2, even ancient megastructures need to stretch in the morning. You step carefully, aware that balance here is dynamic, not fixed. Plants along the canal edge sway slightly as water moves past, their stems flexible enough to bend without breaking. That flexibility seems to echo the entire system. Mainstream historians often point out that Chinampas were remarkably resilient, capable of recovering quickly from floods or droughts compared to dryland farms. Water that threatened other systems was an ally here, absorbed and redirected rather than fought. You pass a section where the canal narrows, reinforced by tightly packed reeds and branches. It feels intentional, like a choke point designed to slow water flow. Some fringe theories suggest these narrowed sections acted as natural filters, trapping debris and improving water quality downstream. Other scholars are skeptical, arguing any filtering was incidental. Historians still argue whether Chinampa canal design actively improved water cleanliness or whether cleanliness was simply maintained through constant movement and plant life. Either way, the water here looks calm, almost polished. Sunlight glints off the surface, breaking into small shifting fragments that dance across the underside of leaves. You realize how much of the Chinampa system operates out of sight. Roots beneath water, stakes buried in mud, layers of decomposing matter quietly feeding new growth. It's a reminder that the most important work often happens where no one's looking. You pause again, letting your fingers trail just above the water. It's cool, steady, patient. This lake has been shaped, redirected, negotiated with, but never fully conquered. Mainstream history records massive hydraulic projects in the Aztec world, causeways, dikes, aqueducts designed to control water levels and protect the city. The Chinampas are part of that broader network, small units in a vast water-based machine. Yet here, standing alone, they feel personal, almost fragile. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about sustainability. Some researchers argue Chinampas represented a near-perfect balance between human need and environmental health. Others caution that maintaining them required constant labor and social stability, making them vulnerable to disruption. Historians still argue whether Chinampa agriculture was inherently sustainable or simply sustained by the unique conditions of its time. The gardens themselves offer no opinion. They just keep floating. A light breeze moves through, and you hear the soft rustle of leaves brushing against one another. The sound is gentle, repetitive, hypnotic. Joke 3, congratulations, you've unlocked background noise so good your brain stops doom scrolling. Your thoughts slow, stretching out like the reflections on the water. As you resume walking, you carry a new appreciation for what holds this place together. Not walls, not monuments, but roots, mud, repetition, and care. The Chinampas don't announce their complexity. They let you discover it gradually, step by step. And as you move on, deeper into the gardens, that hidden strength settles into you too. Quiet, steady, and surprisingly comforting.
You feel time change before you see it change. The light shifts, not brighter exactly, but more intentional, as if the sun has found its proper angle and decided to stay there for a while. Shadows shorten, edges sharpen, and the Chinampas take on a steadier confidence. This is the hour when the gardens and the sky agree on what day it is. You keep walking, aware that here, time isn't measured by clocks but by patterns, by when light hits leaves just right, by when birds settle into background noise instead of performance. Calendars live quietly in this landscape. Mainstream historians tell us the Aztec world ran on intertwined systems of timekeeping, most famously the 260-day ritual calendar and the 365-day solar calendar. These weren't abstract charts pinned to walls. They were lived, felt, embodied through planting, harvesting, and ceremony. As you move through the fields, you sense how agriculture and time fold into each other, each reinforcing the other's rhythm. You pass a small marker at the edge of a plot. Nothing dramatic, just a carved stone, worn smooth. It doesn't announce anything loudly, but it suggests memory. Certain days matter more than others. Certain plantings happen only when signs align. Mainstream sources note that maize planting in particular was closely tied to calendrical rituals and deities associated with rain and fertility. This wasn't superstition layered on top of farming, it was farming's scheduling system. There's a quirky, slightly mind-bending tidbit historians like to mention. Some Aztec rituals involved symbolic reenactments of planting and growth, with humans temporarily standing in for crops or gods. It sounds strange to modern ears, but the logic is clear. Time, ritual, and agriculture were inseparable. Joke 1. Imagine explaining to your calendar app that it needs to be more spiritually aligned with corn. You stop and watch a farmer pause before setting seeds into the soil. The pause isn't long, but it's deliberate. A breath, a glance at the sky, a quiet word. Historians still argue whether these moments were strictly required by religious doctrine or simply traditional gestures passed down through families. Was it obligation, belief, or habit? The answer probably changed from person to person, plot to plot. The sun warms your face now, but not harshly. This warmth matters. Mainstream historians explain that timing planting with seasonal solar patterns helped ensure crops avoided frost and maximized growth. Yet there's debate over how precise ancient farmers could really be without modern instruments.
Historians still argue whether astronomical observations were used with scientific accuracy or symbolic approximation. Standing here, you get the sense that precision and symbolism didn't need to be enemies. You hear a low drum beat somewhere far off, not loud, not insistent, just a pulse carry faintly over water. Maybe it's ceremonial, maybe it's practice, maybe it's nothing at all. The sound weaves into the environment easily, like it belongs there. Joke 2. Even the background music in this place respects your need to relax. You think about how different this relationship with time feels. There's no anxiety about being late, no frantic checking. Time arrives when it arrives, marked by light, by water temperature, by the behavior of plants and animals. Mainstream accounts often emphasize how closely Aztec agriculture followed seasonal cycles, but they don't always capture how soothing that must have been. Predictability without rigidity, structure without panic. There's also scholarly debate about control. Some researchers argue state priests played a major role in determining agricultural timing through calendars and ceremonies. Others believe local farmers relied more on environmental cues than official dates. Historians still argue whether timekeeping was centralized authority or shared intuition. Watching leaves stir in a warm breeze, it feels like the land itself had a vote. A cloud drifts lazily across the sun, dimming the light just a touch. The gardens respond immediately. Colors soften, shadows blur. Then the cloud moves on, and everything snaps back into focus. You realize how tuned in you've become, noticing changes you'd normally ignore. Joke 3. Congratulations, you've achieved ancient farmer awareness. Side effects may include sudden interest in weather. You continue walking, letting the steady presence of the sun guide you. Time here isn't something chasing you, it's something you're walking alongside. The Chinampas don't rush through the day. They unfold it, moment by moment, leaf by leaf. And as you move forward, you feel your own sense of time stretch out, slow down, and finally relax into the rhythm of light and living things.
You begin to notice comfort in small, unexpected places. Not luxury, nothing flashy or excessive, but ease. The Chinampas hum along, and within that hum are quiet systems designed to keep bodies fed, clean, and surprisingly comfortable. As you walk, you pass a narrow canal branch where the water looks clearer, moving gently but steadily. Someone kneels nearby, rinsing vegetables, letting the current do most of the work. This isn't just irrigation, it's daily hygiene folded neatly into the landscape. Mainstream historians note that access to fresh water was one of Tenochtitlan's defining strengths. Aqueducts carried spring water into the city, while canals and lakes handled transport and waste. Out here, on the Chinampas, that same water does double duty, feeding crops, cleaning tools, washing hands. You dip your fingers briefly, feeling the coolness, and it's easy to forget that many European cities of the same era struggled with basic sanitation. Joke 1. Turns out the future smelled better when it floated. You watch someone scrub dirt from roots, then flick the water back into the canal without concern. The system expects organic matter. It's built to absorb it. Mainstream accounts emphasize that waste, plant scraps, spoiled produce, even human refuse, was routinely recycled back into agricultural use. It's not glamorous, but it's efficient. Comfort here doesn't come from avoiding mess. It comes from knowing where mess belongs. A quirky tidbit that often surprises people is that Aztecs bathed frequently, sometimes daily, using steam baths called temazcals. While you don't see one here, the mindset is present. Cleanliness is normal, expected, part of everyday health. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on hygiene was driven more by spiritual beliefs or practical health knowledge, but either way, it shaped daily life deeply. You continue along the path and notice food being prepared nearby. Simple, portable meals, meant to be eaten between tasks. Maize dough shaped and cooked, vegetables roasted lightly, flavor straightforward and nourishing. Mainstream history confirms that the Aztec diet was rich in fiber, protein from beans and insects, and nutrients from diverse crops. This wasn't survival eating, it was balanced eating. Joke 2. Ancient macros were accidentally on point. There's debate among scholars about how evenly this comfort was distributed. Some argue urban elites enjoyed far better living conditions, while others point out that even commoners had access to clean water, nutritious food, and public baths. Historians still argue whether daily comfort in Tenochtitlan was exceptional for its time or simply well documented. Out here, among the gardens, it feels quietly generous, enough for everyone if managed well. You pass a shaded spot where someone pauses to eat, leaning against a willow trunk. The break is unremarkable, but that's the point. Comfort isn't announced, it's assumed. The body works, then rests, then works again. No guilt, no hurry. Joke 3. The original listen to your body philosophy, minus the wellness influencers.
As you walk on, you realize how many systems overlap here. Food, water, cleanliness, rest, all braided together so tightly they're hard to separate. Modern life tends to silo these things, turning them into problems to be solved individually. Here, they're just aspects of the same gentle loop. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about resilience. Some historians argue this integrated approach made Aztec society remarkably robust against everyday challenges. Others caution that such interdependence also made the system vulnerable to sudden disruption. Historians still argue whether this comfort was strength or fragility in disguise. The Chinampas, as always, offer no commentary. They simply continue doing what they do best. You take a deeper breath, noticing how settled you feel. The gardens aren't just feeding a city, they're supporting bodies, routines, small moments of ease. As you move forward, that sense of quiet sufficiency lingers, making everything feel just a little less urgent, a little more manageable.
You sense the shift before you fully understand it. The gardens remain calm, the water still cooperative, but there's a faint tension in the air, like a breeze that doesn't quite belong to the lake. As you walk, causeways stretch farther ahead, straighter, heavier, their stone edges cutting more firmly through the water. This is where the outside world presses in, where change begins to ripple across the canals. Mainstream historians agree on the broad shape of what's coming. The arrival of the Spanish in the early 16th century transformed Tenochtitlan and its Chinampas in ways both sudden and slow. New animals, new tools, new ideas entered a system that had been finely tuned to its environment. As you imagine this moment, it doesn't arrive with fireworks or shouting. It arrives quietly at first, like unfamiliar footsteps on a familiar path. You picture unfamiliar boats appearing on the lake, heavier and less nimble than canoes. Horses, once introduced, require dry ground, reshaping priorities and pathways. Mainstream accounts note that Spanish agricultural practices favored plows, grazing animals, and drained fields, methods fundamentally at odds with floating gardens. The Chinampas don't fail immediately. They adapt where they can, but the balance begins to wobble. There's a quirky, almost tragic detail historians sometimes mention. European livestock compacted the soft soils around canals, damaging their structure over time. The ground that once thrived on gentle care suddenly faced weight it was never designed to carry. Joke 1. Softly, carefully. Turns out not all footprints are created equal. As you walk, you imagine water levels changing, canals altered or filled in, priorities shifting toward roads instead of waterways. Some Chinampas continue producing, others are abandoned. Mainstream history tells us the Great Lakes system around Tenochtitlan was gradually drained over centuries to control flooding and expand dryland. Each drainage project nudged the floating gardens further from the conditions they needed to survive. Historians still argue whether Chinampa decline was inevitable once colonial systems took hold, or whether better integration could have preserved them at scale. Some scholars suggest political upheaval and population loss played a larger role than technology itself. Others emphasize environmental mismanagement. The debate lingers, unresolved, like a question the water never got to answer. You pause at a canal that feels quieter than the others. Not restful quiet, but absence. The banks look worn, less cared for. Weeds push through in uneven patches. It's not dramatic decay, just neglect, and that somehow feels heavier. Joke 2. Systems rarely break all at once. They just stop getting enough attention. Yet not everything disappears. Some farmers keep working the Chinampas, adapting tools, crops, routines. Mainstream historians note that Chinampa agriculture persisted through the colonial period in certain regions, especially around Xochimilco. The system bends, reshapes itself, survives in fragments. It refuses to vanish completely. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about continuity versus rupture. Historians still argue whether post-conquest Chinampas represent survival of indigenous knowledge or a fundamentally altered system wearing familiar shapes. Walking here, you feel both truths overlapping, old rhythms echoing beneath new constraints. The sun sits higher now, the day fully established. You realize this section of the walk carries a different emotional weight. The calm remains, but it's layered with memory, with loss and persistence entwined. Joke 3, gentle and brief. Even peaceful places have complicated pasts. As you move on, you don't feel sadness exactly, more a sober appreciation for resilience. The gardens don't protest change loudly, they absorb it, resist where they can, endure where they must. And as you continue forward, you carry that lesson with you. That survival isn't always about staying the same, but about finding ways to keep going, quietly, steadily, even when the water shifts beneath you.
The path eases again. After the weight of change, the lake seems to offer you a softer stretch, as if it knows you need it. The water resumes its gentle rhythm, small ripples tapping against the stone like a patient metronome. You walk without hurry, letting the scene widen, letting the story breathe. Mainstream historians often describe what comes next not as an ending, but as a long afterlife. Chinampas don't vanish from history when empires fall. They slip into the background.
Colonial records mention them less frequently, but they never disappear entirely. In places like Xochimilco, the system continues quietly, feeding local communities while the larger city reshapes itself around new priorities. You imagine farmers at dawn, centuries after conquest, still stepping onto narrow plots bordered by canals. The tools may differ slightly, the crops may shift, but the basic conversation between land and water continues. Mud still clings to hands. Plants still grow in careful rows. The lake, though reduced, still listens. There's something strangely comforting in this. Grand historical narratives love sharp breaks, before and after, rise and fall. But everyday systems tend to blur those lines. Chinampas become a reminder that history isn't only made of dramatic collapses, it's also made of people showing up the next morning and doing the work again. Joke 1. Low and calm. History may love plot twists, but farmers prefer consistency. As you walk, the city edges closer. You sense it even if you don't see it yet. Sounds drift in, distant voices, the suggestion of movement beyond the reeds. Mainstream historians point out that as Mexico City expanded, Chinampas became surrounded by urban life, not erased by it. They turned into green islands inside a growing metropolis. There is an ongoing scholarly conversation about whether this survival was intentional or accidental. Some argue Chinampas endured because they were simply too productive to ignore. Others suggest they survived because communities protected them, passing knowledge down quietly without ceremony. No consensus settles the matter. The water keeps its secrets. You notice birds again, egrets, herons, shapes lifting from the canals with slow, deliberate wings. Ecologists today often highlight Chinampas as biodiversity hotspots, even in modern times. That's a twist history rarely advertises. Ancient agricultural systems sometimes outperform modern ones in sustainability. Joke 2. Gentle. Turns out old-fashioned occasionally just means tested for 700 years. The path narrows, encouraging focus. You feel less like a visitor now and more like a witness. The gardens aren't museum pieces here. They're living systems, adjusted but active. Mainstream historians emphasize that this continuity challenges simple narratives of loss. Something was damaged, yes, but something also endured. Modern debates enter the picture softly. Scholars, urban planners, and farmers today argue about restoration versus preservation. Should Chinampas be frozen in an authentic past or allowed to keep evolving? Walking here, the answer feels less urgent than the question itself. The system has always changed. Why would it stop now? You pause at a reflection in the water. Sky, reeds, stone, all layered together. It's hard to tell where one ends and another begins. That feels appropriate. Joke 3. Barely a smile. Boundaries are clearer in textbooks than in real life. As you move on, the atmosphere grows steadily calmer, preparing you for the closing stretch of the walk. The story is no longer about conquest or survival alone. It's about endurance through quiet repetition. The gardens don't demand attention. They reward patience. With each step, your breathing slows. The lake accepts you again into its rhythm. Ahead, the path continues, not towards a climax, but towards rest. You keep walking, but now the movement feels almost symbolic. Your feet still follow the narrow edge of the Chinampa, yet your attention drifts outward, widening like the lake at sunrise. The air feels lighter here. Morning has fully claimed the sky, washing it in pale gold and soft blue, the kind of colors that don't shout, but gently insist on being noticed. By this point, mainstream historians usually shift tone. They stop talking about empires and start talking about legacies. Chinampas, they'll tell you, represent one of the most productive agricultural systems ever devised, capable of feeding enormous populations with minimal ecological damage. That's not poetic exaggeration, it's a widely accepted fact. Square for square, these gardens could outproduce many modern farms, all without synthetic fertilizers or engines louder than a paddle splash. You glance down at the water again and remember how nutrients cycle here. Mud dredged from canals, plant waste composted back into the soil, roots filtering the water itself. It's almost annoyingly efficient. Joke 1, soft and sleepy. Turns out sustainability wasn't invented at a climate summit. But there's a quieter, fringe idea that floats alongside the facts. Some researchers suggest Chinampas weren't only about food, but about worldview. They may have embodied a philosophy where humans didn't dominate nature so much as negotiate with it. Not conquer, not retreat, just cooperate. It's hard to prove archaeologically, and historians still argue whether that interpretation romanticizes the past too much. You walk on, letting that question hang unanswered. The gardens don't seem bothered by the debate. Reeds sway either way. Modern farmers who still work Chinampas today often speak about time differently. Days start early, yes, but seasons matter more than hours. Mainstream accounts note that this rhythm clashes badly with city life, where everything demands speed. That tension hasn't gone away. If anything, it's sharper now. You hear a distant motor, maybe a boat, maybe traffic bleeding in from somewhere far off. It fades quickly, swallowed by birdsong. Joke 2. Even modern noise seems to respect the vibe here. Eventually. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether Chinampas could realistically feed large modern populations again. Some say yes, with investment in care. Others argue urban pollution and water scarcity make that impossible. As you walk, the question feels less like a technical problem and more like a choice about priorities. You slow down, not because you're tired, but because the path invites it. The gardens no longer feel like something you're learning about. They feel like something you're sharing space with. A final joke, barely above a thought. If places could sigh, this one definitely would. The light keeps softening, and with it, your thoughts. You're not heading toward an ending now. You're drifting toward stillness. Your pace becomes almost ceremonial now, each step placed with care, as if the ground itself has asked for quiet. The Chinampa path narrows again, reeds brushing your sleeves, their tips catching the light and turning it into something soft and diffused. The lake feels awake but unhurried, like it's already done everything important for the day. Mainstream historians often use this point in the story to zoom out completely. They'll remind you that Chinampas weren't a curiosity on the margins. They were central to how Tenochtitlan functioned. Without them, the city simply couldn't have supported its population. This isn't speculation. It's a foundational fact of Aztec urban life. The gardens were infrastructure, not ornament. Yet there's a quirky detail that still surprises people. Chinampas may have been planted with flowers almost as often as food crops. Some sources suggest blooms were grown for rituals, markets, and sheer aesthetic pleasure. Food for the body? Yes, but also food for the eyes. Joke 1, gentle. Turns out even hyper-efficient farming systems appreciate good vibes. You imagine color layered over green, reds, yellows, whites, mirrored in the canals below. The water doubles everything, making the gardens feel fuller, richer, more generous than they already are. No wonder early Spanish chroniclers struggled to describe what they saw. Floating fields don't fit neatly into European categories. Historians still argue whether Chinampas should be classified as floating gardens at all. Technically, they're anchored to the lakebed, but metaphorically, floating feels right. The system exists in between, land and water, city and nature, permanence and change. You pass a spot where the canal widens, giving the water room to rest. Dragonflies skim the surface. Birds perch without fear. Modern ecological studies often highlight how Chinampas regulate temperature and filter water naturally. That's another mainstream fact that feels almost unreal when you say it out loud. Joke 2. Ancient engineers quietly solving problems we're still arguing about in meetings. Your breathing slows again, sinking with the gentle lap of water against earth. This place doesn't push lessons on you. It just demonstrates them, over and over, patiently. There's a final debate scholars love to circle. Were Chinampas an inevitable innovation or a rare stroke of genius shaped by very specific conditions? No agreement exists. Some say any lake-based society might have developed something similar. Others insist this was a unique convergence of environment, culture, and belief. As you near the end of the path, the question stops mattering. What matters is that it worked. It endured. And for this quiet moment, it still holds you. One last joke drifts through your mind, barely formed. If productivity could be relaxing, this would be it. The light evens out, shadows soften, and the gardens seem to lean back, content. You sense that the walk is almost complete, not with a dramatic finish, but with a gentle release.
You reach the quietest stretch of the path, where the Chinampa seems to dissolve back into the lake instead of ending outright. There's no sign, no marker, just earth easing into water, as if the garden knows when to let go. You stop walking, not because you're told to, but because there's nowhere left you need to be. By now, mainstream historians usually close their discussions by calling Chinampas a lesson in sustainability, a lesson in urban planning, a lesson in respecting limits. It's a fair summary, and it's grounded in fact. These gardens supported one of the largest cities in the pre-modern world, quietly and reliably, without exhausting the environment that made them possible. Still, there's a softer, more speculative idea that lingers at the edges of scholarship. Some suggest Chinampas endured because they aligned human routines with natural cycles so closely that collapse became harder. When work follows water levels, seasons, and daylight instead of fighting them, resilience sneaks in almost unnoticed. Historians still argue whether that harmony was intentional wisdom or simply practical adaptation. You watch the surface of the canal shimmer. Light bends, reflections blur. The gardens no longer feel ancient or modern. They feel timeless. That's not a metaphor historians would approve of, but walking here, it fits. Joke one, barely there. Sometimes vibes beat vocabulary. In the distance, life continues. Boats glide, birds settle. Somewhere beyond the reeds, the city wakes fully, impatient and loud. Yet here, the pace holds. Modern conservationists debate how long places like this can survive urban pressure. Some are hopeful, others are cautious. No one pretends it's simple. You inhale slowly. The smell of water and plants mixes with warm air. This system, these gardens, don't promise solutions. They offer an example. That might be enough. A final joke drifts through your thoughts, sleepy and kind. Turns out the past isn't done teaching. It just whispers now. You take one last look before turning away. The Chinampas don't react. They don't need to. They've been here before you, and they'll keep going after, quietly doing what they do best. Holding land, holding water, holding time just a little longer. And as you step back from the edge, the lake smooths itself out again, calm and patient, ready for the next dawn.